For unit 5.6. For unit 5.6, today we're going to talk about completing the square. So solve by completing the square. Solve quadratic equations.
We're doing notes now.
Solve quadratic equations by completing the square. This is awesome. Solve quadratic equations by completing the square. Is that completed? Yes, this is 5.6. Don't get light. There you go. Someone asked. Okay, solve quadratic equations by completing the square. So, ways to solve a quadratic equation. Okay, there are 3 different ways to solve a quadratic equation. First off, what is a quadratic equation? First thing we need to remember is that a quadratic equation is anything with a square in it. Okay, so quadratic equation, remember, is ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so whenever it has something squared, ax squared plus bx plus c. Everyone should be writing these down. Not playing with our phones. Thank you. So, ways to solve a quadratic equation. What? I'm sorry, we're on 5.5. I'm sorry. Sorry, we're on 5.5. I apologize. I am sorry.
Thank you. You know, who said that?
I was
okay. 5.5. So, solve quadratic equations by completing the square. Okay?
David, shut up.
Stop. 3 different ways to solve a quadratic equation. First way is to factor and set equal to 0.
Not gonna lie, I was looking for my homework.
Okay, that's usually the easiest way to do things, is to factor and set an equation equal to 0. For this unit, none of our equations are going to be factorable. So that's why I'm showing you another way to solve. Okay? Another way that you could solve is what? If something was not factorable, what could you use? You could use the quadratic formula. However, the quadratic formula is really long, okay? Sometimes you have to simplify a lot, and it's a little bit annoying. So, we're going to learn today a third method, and the third way is called completing the square. Okay, so solve by completing the square. So, for example number 1, we are going to ask you to find the value of c, find the value of c that makes x squared plus 26x plus c a perfect square trinomial. Okay, find the value of c that makes x squared, plus 26x plus c a perfect square trinomial. Then, write the expression as the square of a binomial. Then write the expression as the square of a binomial. So what we're trying to get is we want something to be what's called a perfect square. Okay? So you want to have 2 of the exact same things in a radical with a square on them equaling a number. Because then once you have something perfectly squared equaling a number, you can introduce a square root and you can solve that way. So we want to make equations like this. Okay, so we want to make something called a perfect square binomial. The way that you do this is you take b divided by 2 quantity squared. Okay, b divided by 2 quantity squared. What the b value in a quadratic equation?
Second value.
The second value, how else would you characterize it? Is it the first, the middle, or the last? The middle. Okay, so instead of saying b, it's a lot more common sometimes to just say the middle number, or it's a lot easier to remember. Middle number divided by 2 and square it. So in this case, okay, you definitely will need to memorize this formula. Okay, either middle number divided by 2 and square it, or b divided by 2 squared. Okay, you will have to memorize this. For this expression, or for this equation, what is your middle number? 26. So you're going to take 26 divided by 2 and square it. What is 26 divided by 2? 13 squared. What is 13 squared? 169. So the c value is actually 169. And the reason that we're finding that is basically if I wrote out this whole thing again, x squared plus 26x plus 169, and factored that, what multiplies to 169 but adds to 26? 13 and 13. The whole reason we're doing this is to be able to write this factored. And you could rewrite this as x plus 13 quantity squared. Now, you don't actually have to do this much work though. Okay, so your c value is 169. Then I want you to write this as the square of a binomial. This is the square of a binomial. But you don't actually have to do all the factoring. All you really have to do is you're going to put x, whatever's inside this, okay, whatever this value is always going to be the value that's being squared. So if you show your work and you do the middle number divided by 2 and square it, if you show the work, whatever that middle number is right there, all you do is you just plug it into an equation. So that's 169, that's your c value. This is it written as the binomial squared. Okay, so I know that seems a little strange right now, so let's do another one. Now, sometimes we're going to ask you just for the c value. Sometimes they might ask you for write the binomial squared, so it would be that answer. Sometimes you're actually going to have to solve them, and we'll get to those. Okay, example number 2, count today. I want you to, again, find the value of c. Find the value of c to complete the square. Then write as the square of a binomial. So find the value of c to complete the square. Then write as the square of a binomial. X squared minus 4x plus c. So for this one, to find the c value, you always take the middle number divided by 2 and square it. So what is negative 4 divided by 2? Negative 2 squared, so your c value will be what? Negative 2 squared is positive 4. So your c value is 4. That's the first part of the question. Then to write this as a binomial squared, it always starts with an x. This number is all you have to plug in to the parentheses. X minus 2 quantity squared. So all you do is if you're showing your work, you just take that number and plug it in. Okay? You will know if it's supposed to be plus or minus. This one, 26 divided by 2, was a positive 13. So you put in a plus 13. Here, negative 4 divided by 2 was negative 2. So we put in x minus 2. That's your answer. Okay? All you have to do is if you're showing your work, you don't have to do all of this factoring. Okay? You should just show the work for when you're dividing by 2, basically. Okay? Yes, you could do it in your head, but I would recommend showing your work because the ones we're going to do tomorrow are a little bit more complicated than this. So it's nice if you have work to show. Questions so far? Next ones we're going to do are actually solve by completing the square. Okay, solve by completing the square. Solve by completing the square. So for number 3, and we're just going to do 2 more. Solve by completing the square. X squared minus 10x equals negative 1. X squared minus 10x equals negative 1. Solve by completing the square. So for this one, there isn't a c. Okay, what you need to do is actually create a space. So x squared minus 10x. Here is where we're going to add something in. Equals a negative 1. So to find your c value, we take the middle number, divide it by 2, and square it. So negative 10 divided by 2 gives you negative 5. Square that, and what are you going to add into your equation? Plus 25. Now, if you add it to one side of the equation, what do you have to do to the other side? Also add it. Okay, you have to be fair. You have to keep like a balanced equation. It's kind of like in chemistry, you have to keep a balanced equation. So if you add 25 to one side, you also have to add 25 to the other side. From here, we can write this as a binomial squared, so that would be what? X. How do I write this as a binomial squared? What goes inside with the x? Negative 5 comes right from there. Or you could actually factor this. Okay, so x minus 5 squared equals negative 1, and 25 gives you what? 24, positive 24. Then from here, can you solve that? How would you solve? Root both sides. Okay, what happens whenever you put in a square root? Have to put in a plus or minus. So that would give you x minus 5 equals plus or minus, what's the square root of 24? Do we know that? Is that a perfect square? No. Can I break it down though? Yes. What goes into 24? 6 and 4. 6 breaks up to 2 and 3. 4 breaks down to 2 and 2. So we can take out a pair of 2's. So what does root 24 break into? Plus or minus 2 root 6. Okay? Split these up. So you get x minus 5 equals positive 2 root 6. And x minus 5 equals negative 2 root 6. The reason that you want to split these up is just in case things are going to be able to add together. Just in case you have any like terms. How would you get x by itself for this first equation? Add 5. And if you add 5, can you add 2 root 6 plus 5? No. So you just write it as 5 plus 2 root 6. But there are no like terms, so you leave it just like that. That's one answer. Then do the same thing here. Add the 5 to both sides. And we should get an answer of x equals 5 minus 2 root 6. Now, you could combine those and write them in one equation, but there are technically 2 different answers, okay? 5 plus 2 root 6 and 5 minus 2 root 6. Those are 2 separate answers. Questions on how we did that? Okay, let's do one more and then we'll be done. Number 4, again, I want you to solve by completing the square. X squared minus 12x plus 4 equals 0. X squared minus 12x plus 4 equals 0. First off, is this factorable? What would multiply to 4 and add to negative 12? 2 times 6 multiplies to 4?
Oh, wait. No. Like what?
Can anything multiply to 4 and add to 12? No. So you could use the quadratic formula, but that takes a lot of time. So we're going to solve this by completing the square. So we need to create that space. How could I create that space? Move the 4 to the other side. Okay, so I'd give you x squared minus 12x. Leave that space because we want to fill in that c value. Equals negative 4. Leave your space there again because we're going to and want to complete the square, so add to that side. How do you figure out what needs to be added? Middle number divided by 2 and square it. So negative 12 divided by 2 gives you what? Negative 6. Negative 6 squared means we add what to both sides? Plus 36. Okay, how do we write this as a perfect square binomial? What goes inside with the x? What goes inside with the x? Negative 6, and you know that because if you showed work, it's just right there, and you don't have to actually do any factoring. So x minus 6 quantity squared equals what? Negative 4, positive 36 gives you 32. Then to get x minus 6 by itself, root both sides. Make sure you put in plus or minus, so that gives you x minus 6 equals plus or minus, what does 32 break down to? What comes out of a 32? Break this down however you'd like. I'm going to go 2 and 16. 16 is 4 and 4. Do I need to keep breaking down the 4s? No, you found a pair. Okay, that's all we're looking for is just a pair. So we should get plus or minus 4 root 2, because there's the 2 left behind. It doesn't have anything to pair up with. Then break this into 2 separate equations. So x minus 6 equals 4 root 2, and x minus 6 equals negative 4 root 2. Use the additive inverse, so that means move the 6, so add 6 to both sides. If there are any like terms, you should combine them. Okay, but most of the time there's not going to be any like terms here. If there are like terms, that means that you originally could have factored it. So for this unit, you shouldn't have any like terms. So that would give you 6 minus 4 root 2. So for all of these equations, you're going to end up with 2 different answers. Yes?
When you do the square root of 32, say you broke down the 4 more, does that matter?
You could. If you broke down the 4 more, you'd have 2 and 2 and another 2 and 2. So if you had 2 pairs of 2, 2 times 2 would be 4. So it doesn't matter, but you're doing more work than you need to. Once you find pairs, you can stop breaking them down. You would end up getting the same thing. Okay, homework for this is going to be on page 288. You are doing numbers 3 through 8 and 12 through 27. Page 288 in your book, numbers 3 through 8 and 12 through 27. Any questions?